What's your plan to push back against a potential midterm plot from Donald Trump? Because we've seen a redistricting effort that was squashed. We've seen the Save America Act. We've seen Donald Trump trying 100 different ways to undermine the sanctity of our midterms. Are you working with other governors to safeguard our midterms?
I am. And let me just say a couple of things. First, as you know, he did federalize our National Guard and tried to put them on the streets of Illinois. We sued, we fought him, and we won at the Supreme Court. Shockingly to many people, we won. So that's number one. That does not mean that, by the way, that they can't do this at the midterm elections. Indeed, instead, what they're doing is flooding the cities, you saw it in Minneapolis, with ICE and CBP, who are not National Guard, but law enforcement, arguably law enforcement. But it is the same thing. They're wearing uniforms. They're wearing camouflage uniforms, carrying automatic weapons. He wants to put them at the polling places. He does.
I am proud to be joined today by the governor of the great state of Illinois, Governor JB Pritzker. Governor, how are you doing today?
How are you doing, Adam? I'm doing great.
I'm doing amazing. So I'm filming in Chicago. It's surprisingly super, super nice at this moment. I love the city and I love the leadership that you brought to the state of Illinois. So I want to dig into some policies that you've been introducing to the state, a new comprehensive housing plan, talk about some of the leadership you've provided. But I guess I want to start off our conversation pretty broad. I feel like for the past decade, the Democrats have been very unified in our opposition to Donald Trump, which is a good thing. We're very unified against his anti-democratic tendencies. But we need to stand for something that really excites the American people if we want to win elections in a meaningful way. I guess I want to ask you, as a leader in the party, what should the party be actively standing for in terms of policy and ideals?
Well, I appreciate it. Now, let me start by saying that it's clear that in 2024, the party got way off message. And importantly, I became a Democrat because, well, you know, there's some fundamental things about being a Democrat that I think still attract people to the party and that we should be focusing on. You know, we're the party that created Medicaid, Medicare, and Social Security. How about the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act? Those are things that Democrats are for, and we didn't emphasize them. And how about this? Nobody talked about, do you remember anybody saying anything about raising the minimum wage nationally? I mean, it's $7.25, the minimum wage, national minimum wage. We've raised it to $15 in Illinois, but in most of the rest of the country, it's still $7.25. And you know what the tipped wage is? It's like $2.20 an hour. You can't live on $7.25 even. I mean, that's $14,000 a year if you have one full-time job. We need to be talking about things like that. How do we raise people's wages? Let's start by raising the minimum wage. If you ask every Republican if we should raise the minimum wage, every single one of them is opposed, and some of them actually think we shouldn't have a minimum wage. If you ask every Democrat, I'm talking about in Congress, let's say, should we raise the minimum wage? Every single one of them believes we should raise the minimum wage. We have differences of opinion. Some people think it should be maybe $11, $15, $20, $25, but every single one of us and about 80% of the American public thinks we should raise the minimum wage. So those are just some things that we have to get back to. And then one last thing. There's actually plenty more to talk about. What should we be running on? But it's, you know, we have an enormous issue that really hasn't been grappled with in public policy, and that is the impact on people's lives in a negative way of AI.
Yeah.
We're going to lose a lot of jobs in this economy because of AI. And but by the way, there's no stopping AI. So for those who think let's become Luddites and maybe we could just hire a lot of people to do the things that AI would otherwise do, that's not going to work. The question is, how do we transform the economy for people who wouldn't be able to get a job in an economy where AI is really dominant, and make sure we have the right education level, skills, and pay for the work that people need to have and to pay the bills. So those are all things that we've got to grapple with. And you know, I have thoughts about that, but we may not have enough time today.
Yeah, we'll revisit them at some point in the future because the Democratic Party is going to have a true ideological battle coming up. And I absolutely agree with your analysis that we need to have exciting tentpole ideas that can push the country in the right direction, like a higher minimum wage, like the Civil Rights Act, like better healthcare, and then just packaging that in a very intuitive way. I think some of the Democratic policies can be too technical. It's like, it'll be so means tested to hell that by the time you explain the entire policy, they're just not listening anymore. Meanwhile, Trump is over there like, no tax on tips, build the wall, just very intuitive wording. So the Democrats need to have these large ideas, especially with AI. AI is going to be huge, and especially with housing. Housing is something that my generation cares about a lot. And something that you introduced to the state of Illinois very recently was the Build Act, I believe it's called. Can you explain to me what the Build Act is, what it does, and how this can translate into a rejuvenation of housing nationwide eventually?
Well, let's start with, people can't afford even to rent a place to live, let alone to buy a place to live. I mean, there are a whole lot of people who are being left out and left behind because of that. And again, just for 1 second, reminding people need to earn, we need to allow people and provide for people enough earnings so they could actually have a place to live, but we also need to make it affordable. So
Yeah.
the most important thing about the build plan is that there are enormous barriers for people who want to develop housing and make it available. I'm not talking about what we traditionally refer to as affordable low-income housing. That's also quite important, and we're doing a lot on that front. But build is really about what I would describe as middle housing. So people who are making between $75,000 and $175,000 a year still can't buy a home, and many can't really afford to live the way they would like to by renting. And so what we need to do is make it more affordable for those folks to own a home and to be able to afford to live somewhere. So that's what Build is about. And it's about helping developers, let's start with that, to develop housing that's in that category, and then making sure that we have the financing available so people can buy a home that's in that category. One great thing about living in the Midwest, and this, in Chicago and throughout Illinois, housing is actually much less expensive here in the Midwest than it is on the coasts.
Yeah.
And so when I think about housing, I think about the kind of average median kind of home in Illinois, about $300,000 to $350,000. That's way different than living, let's say, in Silicon Valley or in New York City or the surrounding areas there. And still people can't afford. So it's about removing the barriers, making permitting much faster so those houses can get built, and making sure that we've got, again, for people who just need a little bit of help with a down payment, a little bit of extra help, that gets them over the hump. And so we put a whole plan together that involves that. And then importantly, to make sure that as people are able to find the housing that they want, that they're actually afford to live in those homes.
Mm-hmm.
So lowering the cost of electricity for people, because that's, being able to afford to actually survive in a home after you bought it, also hugely important. So all of that is part of a plan that we put together and that we're implementing here in the state of Illinois.
What you said about Chicago is very true. Many people begged me to start up this media company or this debate show that I'm starting in New York or LA. And they said, you should debate Trump supporters out there. But I said, the Midwest is so untapped for talent. How many Northwestern students would love to work on a film project for a YouTube channel? So now we're trying to tap the Midwest for talent and people. It's so affordable for a young person like me. Is the theory behind the Build Act that subsidizing the cost of housing isn't enough, that you should also build it, that we need more supply, and more supply across the country is how the price will lower? How would you explain it in the Econ 101 way? Like I'm a first level econ student.
Yeah, you're 100% right. And you're way beyond the first level. But it is about increasing supply to meet the demand so that we can bring prices down. That's really what it's about. Beyond just building more housing, we also have a lot of housing stock that exists today, but can't be accessed. I'll give you the example like redlining. Here, let me give you the example of, there are housing units like an apartment above a garage that can't be rented out because of the rules and regulations in that local community. It might be available in some other community, although often isn't. How about if we made those units available all across the state? So to me, we need about 250,000 more places to live in Illinois, and we could just come up with 100,000. I mean, that's a lot of the 250 by just making those units available. So that's one way to do it, is kind of remove the barriers for existing homes to be available for people to rent or to buy. And that's also part of it. And so it's more housing stock that's important. And again, it could be existing places or new places, but very importantly, developers who have a hard time seeing their way through a whole permitting process and going through a county board and going through the town council and waiting to get permission to file something, they're just giving up. And we should make it easier for them to develop. Sometimes it's a 4-flat, a duplex, and sometimes it's a whole condo building.
Yeah, if you precisely remove the right regulations or deregulate in a precise way, then it can lead to more supply. I think more Democrats need to be selling this on the national stage in a very intuitive way. In 60 seconds, you just explained to me in a very simple way how we can create more housing and build. We need something like that. Build more housing, just a national campaign to do that. I think that's the messaging for it. I want to get your genuine thoughts on the Iran strikes and where this goes, because it's an interesting line I've had to walk. Part of my team is Iranian. My dad is from the Middle East, from Syria. So we understand how awful the supreme leader is. This regime is despicable. The supreme leader was terrible. So when talking about this, there's a line you have to walk where it's like, nobody is trying to defend this regime. They're obviously awful, but there is rule of law internationally that you have to uphold. What's been your framework when approaching the strikes over the past few days?
Well, let's all stop just for a moment, and whatever side you're on, let's pray for the well-being and the safety of our troops. They didn't ask for this. They've been sent to war, and we've already lost lives. And the families of those soldiers are suffering even now. We have Illinois National Guardsmen who are over there that have been federalized and sent to the Middle East before this war began. We have Illinois National Guard that are likely to be called up and sent there even now. So let's all stand together in that regard. Let's also recognize that there was no justification. There was no congressional authority. This is not an emergency or a need for immediacy that allows a president to sidestep the Congress because the nation is in danger in that moment. So it's illegal what the president has done. Everybody can have a different opinion about whether or not there should be a war in the Middle East right now. I do not think there should be, but I also think, as you do, that the Ayatollah was a terrible person who caused a lot of death and destruction, and particularly to his own people, not to mention the terrorism that Iran has fomented across the Middle East and elsewhere. So, but I think that it's okay, even if, listen, we have so many countries in the world that we think are bad actors, right?
Yeah.
You and I could name them probably right now. We'd probably have some of the same names we'd name immediately. But the question is, should we be going to war with all of them? Should we be trying to remove and decapitate the leadership of their countries with no provocation on our part? Are there other ways to go about that don't endanger American lives? And I guess I would give you the example here of, Donald Trump is a hypocrite in so many ways. But one is removing support for the Ukrainians who are just trying to keep their own people alive. They were attacked by the Russians. And so like some question of like, why would we pull our support from the Ukrainians who are simply trying to defend their own territory? And in most cases, what we've done is weighed in on behalf of the Russians, who are clearly not our friends. And I guess the last question would be, should we be going in with U.S. troops to try to take out Putin or take out the Russian leadership? I mean, where is the line here? that should be drawn. And that I think is where Donald Trump, there's no logic, no reason. It is, I guess he got convinced by Benjamin Netanyahu to engage in this. And it's dangerous. I don't know if you saw just recently in the last couple hours, Rubio says that the immediacy need to not notify Congress was that they knew that the Israelis were going to attack Tehran and that some of the effect would be, therefore, that U.S. interests would be attacked, and therefore we had to join in.
That doesn't make sense as immediacy. That's retaliatory.
Of course, and that's ludicrous. So they're clearly just trying to come up with some excuses. But Donald Trump has no real foreign policy. It's just might makes right.
Yeah, and as he has no real foreign policy, and due to that, they have no real goals going into this. Like, they have said multiple different goals regarding nuclear capacity, then regime change, and they backed off regime change. Then they've had a bunch of different conflicting stories. I've been saying on my show, they basically went from like neocon Dick Cheney to America First back to neocon Dick Cheney. Because a year ago, I was arguing with Trump supporters who didn't want to fund Ukraine, not a single penny to Ukraine. They thought we shouldn't interfere with any country. They couldn't understand. Then they started to make this argument that we can interfere with countries if it's in our hemisphere. They said, oh, Venezuela and Greenland are in our hemisphere. You probably saw this hemispheric argument that they were making. Now they've looped all the way back to Dick Cheney, and they're like, you know what? We can interfere with any country, whether it's in the Middle East, whether it's in Latin America. They've looped all the way back.
And it appears that there are aspects or, strains of MAGA that are now peeling off. Because they now realize that they were lied to. I don't know why it took them this long, but that's okay. They now realize that Donald Trump was never about, America first and pulling out of the rest of the world. And, even if you thought that was a good idea back then, that's not what he's doing. Yeah. And indeed, I think it's weakened our country. Now every one of our allies and every one of the countries around the world isn't sure, is now believes that we are either their enemy or we're no longer their friend.
Yeah.
And so we've put ourselves on an island, and have no support. And Donald Trump attacks our European allies who stood with us in so many different wars and so many different conflicts. And sometimes it's on economic matters and sanctions, for example. You think they're going to do that anymore? You think they trust us at all anymore? I asked 3 people that I know that live in Europe that are U.S. citizens. Now they've lived there for a couple decades. I asked them, do you think that we'll ever be able to regain the respect or the trust? How long do you think it would take for Europe to come back to trusting it? Two of them said, out of the 3, 2 of them said 20 years. Wow. And the third one said never. Because they don't trust the United States anymore. They think the American people are out of our minds because we elected this guy now twice.
Yeah, I mean, think about it. Even if we do get a Democrat in office in 2028, which hopefully we do, then who's to say the American people in 8 years or 12 years won't just re-vote in some lunatic asshole that isolates the United States? There needs to be continuity. We had this continuity between administrations before that we've lost with Donald Trump. I want to ask you some genuine questions that I've been wondering about Donald Trump's treatment towards you. When I go into a lot of these debates on CNN or whatever, part of my framework is that as a young dude, I've grown up watching the president constantly act like the opposition party shouldn't exist. The way that he spoke about Obama during his rise to politics, the way that he spoke about Hillary Clinton, the way that he tried to rig the election in 2020 and storm the Capitol. And then even the way he's governed over the past year, of course, sending the military to opposition states. Something that has really, truly bothered me was when he posted that AI photo that said like Apocalypse Now or whatever. It was a disgusting AI photo. That should break through to the average American. Then when he called for the arrest of you and Mayor Johnson, this is something that should break through so much so that like this should be in the headlines for months. He's calling for the arrest of governors and mayors. What was your reaction to that? And what's the framework that you approach these things with when Trump is attacking you in authoritarian ways?
Well, the first thing, as you know, is it's not like I'm sitting around and just letting him do it and not saying anything in response. And it's not just about me. I mean, to me, my job is to protect the people that I represent, the people that I govern as governor of Illinois. And so And I said from the beginning, literally, I think 2 days after he was elected, if you come for my people, you got to come through me. And I really mean that. And that's why when he threatened to jail me, I said, well, come and get me then. Because, he's, first of all, a lot of it is bluster. Sometimes it's not, as you've seen, he is trying to bring criminal charges, get the DOJ, which should
doesn't work.
An agency, to do his bidding. And maybe he'll try to do that. I don't know, but I can tell you, not having done anything wrong, come and get me. And the fact is that I think unfortunately we don't have a lot of leaders. This is just my own view, that who have been willing to stand up and speak out and push back hard enough. I know people have said things that are tough, but to me, every day that goes by that we're not pushing back, every day, if you are not pushing back, they are gaining power, because these are authoritarians at heart. He believes he has the ability to do anything that he wants. And when you do push back, when you kind of, get out your baseball bat, and say, get away from me, he does take a step back, generally speaking. And again, but we've all got to stand together in doing this. Not enough people have been doing it. I helped to build a Holocaust museum. I sat next to and worked with for 10 years Holocaust survivors. Mm-hmm. And they would tell you that there are 4 types of people in the world that they learned as they were growing up, and many of them, as they were being imprisoned. 4 types of people. There are those who are collaborators, right? We know what those are. There are bystanders, people who just let it happen. I'm not part of that. We'll see what happens. Those who are rescuers, who are, some great heroes who will, hide people in different circumstances, or, stand up for them. But it's the upstanders, that category, people who are willing to stand up and push back and speak out. And if more people had been like that at the beginning of the German regime in the early 30s, that the outcomes might have been very, very different. But people capitulated. People went around, or they just were like stood by and let it happen. And there were very few rescuers. So that's the world I think we're living in. Not doesn't mean it's going to end the way it did in Germany, but it does mean that if we're not pushing back, we're losing power.
Yeah, and we need a Democratic Party full of upstanders, you said. We need a Democratic Party full of people who will push back in a very, very relentless way. I guess that leads me to the final question. After Donald Trump has mobilized the National Guard to the state of Illinois, mobilized troops, what's your plan, I guess, as much detail as you can go into, what's your plan to push back against a potential midterm plot from Donald Trump? Because we've seen a redistricting effort that was squashed. We've seen the Save America Act. We've seen Donald Trump trying 100 different ways to undermine the sanctity of our midterms. Are you working with other governors to safeguard our midterms?
I am. And let me just say a couple of things. First, as you know, he did federalize our National Guard and tried to put them on the streets of Illinois. We sued, we fought him, and we won at the Supreme Court. Shockingly to many people, we won. So that's number one. That does not mean that, by the way, that they can't do this at the midterm elections. Indeed, instead, what they're doing is flooding the cities, you saw it in Minneapolis, with ICE and CBP, who are not National Guard, but law enforcement, arguably law enforcement. But it is the same thing. They're wearing uniforms. They're wearing camouflage uniforms, carrying automatic weapons. He wants to put them at the polling places. He does. I've been saying this all along, whether it's National Guard or CBP or ICE. He wants to put them at the polling places. You know why. Mm-hmm. And remember, it was Michael Flynn back in 2020, early 2021 or late 2020, after Donald Trump had lost the election, who told him that he should seize the ballot boxes. And I do believe that if these elections, as I think many would predict, don't come out his way, he will claim fraud. That's why he's asked for everybody's voter rolls, right? Yep. He wants to be able to gin up some reason, and it'll be a claim of fraud, even though, frankly, we run fraud-free elections here. I mean, there's been very, very few cases across the country of any fraud.
Yeah.
But he'll claim it. And he will use these law enforcement officers or National Guard, if he were allowed to, if he claims the Insurrection Act, to scare people away from the polls and or seize the ballot boxes. I mean, so yes, sorry, that is a long-winded way of saying.
Oh, that's exactly what we need to know.
And very importantly, yes, I am talking to other governors. I don't want to reveal to you all the things that we're talking about, but suffice to say that we are going to have to think about what I just told you could happen. The things that we can do to both make people feel more comfortable about going to the voting booth, the ballot box, if something like that were happening, and how do we prevent the seizing of those ballot boxes? So those are things that we're talking about among various Democratic governors. We want to protect people's right to vote. Again, we're the party of the Voting Rights Act in Illinois. We legalized mail-in balloting for everybody. And I'm proud of the work that we've done to secure and make available to people access to the ballot box. And we're just not going to give that up.
Yeah, never. And thank you guys for being on the front line and pushing back against this administration's attempts to take our elections from us. I think that we'll win the midterms. I tell my audience all the time that we should not be apathetic or think that the midterms are not worth voting, and we need to vote and turn out in numbers. Think about how much credibility Trump has lost since January 1st. We've seen Renee Good, we've seen Alex Preddy murdered, then they lied to us. The Epstein files have been released. We've seen Iran strikes. The American people do not view Trump as credible. So if he does try to lay the groundwork and mobilize the National Guard, people are going to see directly through it. So we just need to vote, turn him into a lame duck president, have more oversight committees, and lead. So thank you, Governor, for making the time. I really hope we'll talk more and continue your great leadership in the Democratic Party in the state of Illinois.
Thanks, Adam. Great to see you.
Great chat.